Hello, I'm going to be reading one of my favourite books that I read at school. I hope you like it. It's called Erik and the Christmas Horse. Erik, who lived in a town of Gothenburg in Sweden, had been waiting for a long time for the snow to come. He was lonely, for there was no other children in the building where he lived with his mother and father. In fact, there were no other children in the whole street. If it snowed, Erik thought, he could build a snowman and maybe even an igloo. On Wednesday, Erik awoke very early. It was St. Lucy's Day, the 13th of December, and Christmas was not far off. It was so quiet that Erik wondered what was happening. He could not even hear the noise of the traffic from the corner. All the usual sounds seemed muffled. He rushed to the window and looked out. At least it was snowing. When Erik had finished his breakfast, he took his school bag and went down through the courtyard and out into the street. Snow was falling everywhere and the ground was soft and white. The people in the street had snow on their clothes, but they all looked happy. Suddenly, Erik heard clip-clop, clippity-clop. He looked down the narrow street, and there was old Mr. Lindenberg with his cart horse Mary coming to make his deliveries. Erik had known Mr. Lindenberg and Mary for a long time. He felt sorry for them. They looked very sad today. Mr. Lindenberg's clothes were wet and Mary's head drooped almost to the ground as they drove into the courtyard. Erik rushed back to say hello to them. "Oh dear," sighed Mr. Lindenberg. "What Christmassy weather. You're lucky, Erik. You can run upstairs to your mother's kitchen and get warm, but it's not so good for many other people who have nowhere to live." Erik had always wondered where Mr. Lindenberg and his brown horse lived. Now he felt sure they must sleep somewhere under a bush at night or down by the harbour. He thought of inviting them to come into his kitchen, but then he wondered how Mr. Lindenberg could carry Mary up the 4 flights of stairs. At school that morning, Erik thought only of Mr. Lindenberg and Mary. His mind was not on the St. Lucy's Day celebration. He wished that Mary was a very little horse, just about the size of a dog, so that he could pick her up. Then he and Mr. Lindenberg could take her upstairs to Mother's kitchen, where it was nice and warm. That afternoon, when Erik got home from the school, Mr. Lindenberg and Mary came back again. It was snowing even harder now, and cold wind was blowing. As Erik was patting Mary, Mr. Lindenberg asked, "Why do you look so solemn, Erik?" "I was wondering," said Erik, "if you and Mary could come to my house for Christmas." Mr. Lindenberg looked surprised. He thought a minute and said, "Yes, perhaps we will visit you. But how would you like to take a drive with Mary and me right now?" Erik agreed that it was a good idea. "Then run upstairs and tell your mother," said Mr. Lindenberg. Erik was soon sitting in the cart beside Mr. Lindenberg, driving through the town. Mary trotted along, and the snow drifted around her hooves. The streets looked beautiful. The snow swept along in white clouds. The Christmas decoration gleamed red, blue, and yellow. Down by the harbour, a tall Christmas tree swayed to and fro in the strong wind. But all these lovely sights did not cheer Erik up much. As they drove over a bridge, Mr. Lindenberg said, "Aren't you enjoying the ride, Erik?" What are you thinking about that makes you so sad? All the people who have nowhere to live like you and Mary, said Erik quietly, still thinking how cold it must be for Mr. Lindenberg and Mary under the bush at night. Mr. Lindenberg shook his head in amazement, but he did not answer. They passed a lot of traffic, cars and buses and motorcycles, and there was a long goods train going over the railway bridge. Suddenly, Mr. Lindenberg seemed to have an idea. Wouldn't it be nice to have some tea and warm ourselves up a bit? He said. My wife is expecting Mary and me, and I'm sure she will be glad to see you. Erik wondered if Mr. Lindenberg's wife lived under the bush too, but he decided not to ask. Mary clip-clopped quietly past the big shipping yards. It was beginning to get dark. The snow was falling so heavily that Mary could hardly see the boats on the other side of the river. Perhaps Mrs. Lindenberg could come home and have tea with us too, Erik said. And we could put up a bed for her by the window. You could sleep on the kitchen sofa where I usually sleep, and I could sleep on some cushions on the floor, and Mary could live down in the storeroom. Mr. Lindenberg heard all this, but he did not answer. We'll have such a happy time in the evening, said Erik. But you must come soon so that we can celebrate Christmas together. Mr. Lindenberg nodded thoughtfully, but he still did not answer. Erik wondered what he was thinking about that made his face look so mysterious. Now they were coming to a place with trees and beautiful wooden houses. Mr. Lindenberg stopped Mary at the side of the road and gave her a bag full of oats. Stay here, he said. They left Mary and went into a yard to look at her stable. It was a little house which was very old. This is where Mary lives, said Mr. Lindenberg as they went back into the street. Erik kept wondering why Mr. and Mrs. Lindenberg did not live in Mary's stable too, instead of being out into the cold. Mr. Lindenberg took Erik by the hand and they trotted together up the steep hillside. It was so quiet and peaceful here. There were little cottages with pretty gardens and lots of fruit, trees and bushes, but they were now black and bare because it was winter. A dog was barking and the snow was swirling in the wind. Down below lay the river and the harbour, and on the other side of the river, the lights of the town were gleaming. Mr. Lindenberg and Erik were standing in front of a little cottage. Mr. Lindenberg opened the garden gate and they went up the steps to the front door. The door opened and a woman came out. Welcome home, she said. The tea is just made and the cakes are fresh from the oven. Mr. Lindenberg smiled. This is Mrs. Lindenberg, he said to Erik, and this is the house where we live. Then he turned to Mrs. Lindenberg. I have brought my friend Erik to tea. They all went back into the cottage and into the kitchen. Do you live in this house? Said Erik. Yes, said Mr. Lindenberg. This is our home. Then you don't live under a bush at all? No, said Mr. Lindenberg, smiling. You're a fine boy to say that we could come and live with you, but I have brought you here to show you that we are lucky enough to have a proper home of our own. At first, Erik felt very shy about having made such a mistake, but then Mrs. Lindenberg brought in her black cat, and that cheered him up again. After tea, they set off in the cart again, and Erik was soon back home. It went on snowing all through the night, and it snowed for a whole week. Erik even built an igloo in the yard. Then Mary came clip-clopping again. Clip-clop, clippity-clop. she went, and in the cart sat Mr. Lindenberg. He looked almost like a snowman. "I am glad to see you," he said to Erik. "I have a parcel for you." "For me," said Erik in surprise. "May I open it now?" "You must wait until this evening," said Mr. Lindenberg. "I have brought you the parcel because you are such a fine boy." In the evening, Erik made a snow lantern out of snowballs. He lit a candle and put it inside the lantern. The light shone out between the snowballs over the yard and the igloo. Then Erik took out Mr. Linden's parcel and opened it carefully. Inside there was a brown wooden horse. It hung its head a little and it looked just like Mary. Erik put the wooden horse beside the snow lantern. It was just as though Mary had come clip-cloppeting out between great mountains of snow. "Clip-clop, clippity-clop," whispered Erik softly as he patted the little wooden horse and thought with a smile how soon it would be Christmas. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.